Hello, my friends. This is Eric Parker with One Number Tableau Experts. And in this week's video, we're going to dive into how can you configure a data model in Tableau Desktop that contains multiple fact tables and multiple fact tables as base tables specifically. So this is a video that's a long time coming. I think I first started to ruminate and think about this probably 8 months ago, and I have been procrastinating for a number of reasons. One of them was just I knew that it was going to be a beast to create the data source that I wanted to be able to use for this example. And also, I just wanted to get more comfortable using this feature and kind of learning some of the ins and outs. And I'm really glad that I did wait and procrastinate because I specifically want to shout out Kirk Monroe. If you don't follow him on LinkedIn, you need to. He is definitely the foremost public expert on Tableau relationships. He's put a lot of thought into them, puts out a lot of good content on them. I got to touch base with him a couple weeks ago, kind of share what I was thinking about for the sake of this video, and he provided me some really good feedback. So shout out to Kirk. I'll link his profile in the description below, so please do give him a follow for all his help. So a couple of notes about what we're about to go through, right? So what you see on the screen right here is a screenshot of the data model that we will eventually be building. We are using some HR data for this example. So that includes things like active headcount, terminations, open positions, being able to dig into what departments are these a part of, how many candidates have interviewed for positions. You'll see there's a calendar table there. Shout out to Kirk for inspiring that inclusion. And so what we're going to be doing is looking at how can you create like a singular worksheet in Tableau that would pull data from all of these places simultaneously using the relationships data model to allow Tableau to be more efficient. Okay. For those that haven't spent a lot of time in relationships already, I'm going to put some links in the description below, so you can dive into some videos that we've done on relationships in the past that are maybe a little bit more introductory to intermediate level, because this is like relationships 400, right? This is some of the most advanced things that you can get into. But to give you the Spark Notes version, one of the big benefits of using relationships in Tableau is to reduce unnecessary duplication, right? So when you use a join in Tableau, what will happen is that oftentimes cells of data will duplicate, and a lot of times it's strategic duplication, right? So imagine that you have, I don't know, let's say a table of data with 100 students and they all took the same class, like they're all in Biology 101. So if you join the class data to the student level data, it repeats Biology 101 100 times because all 100 of these students took Biology 101, right? But that's not super efficient from a data model perspective because now you've duplicated that biology data over and over again. Tableau ideally wants to work with as few cells of data as possible. That makes it more efficient. So the fewer columns you have, the fewer rows that you have, the more efficient Tableau will be. You will bloat and slow you down your data source when you're duplicating data and it's just extra, weight that Tableau has to carry around that may not be necessary. So that is the short version of kind of the beauty of relationships, is to cut down on data duplication, streamline everything, and just make it super efficient. Okay. So like in this example, all three of these base fact tables can link out to a department table, right? So I could say, hey, who's currently an employee in this department? Who's been terminated? What open positions are there? Now there's one table, open positions, which links out to candidates, right? So that's the only one that candidates really make sense to tie to. And then the calendar table, which is interesting, can link out to active headcount, to candidate interview dates, and then determination dates. So I've just sort of drawn you with those three different colors some of the connections that we're going to be creating when it comes to this data model. So bear with me as we do this. Now, just a couple notes about the data source itself, as well as this Tableau workbook. They're going to be available for you to download. So check out the links in the description. I will post a copy of this data on Data World where you can download it. I'll post a copy of this workbook on Tableau Public where you can download it. And this data in this example is very Yeah, it's very close to some things I've built in the real world. So YouTube is not my full-time job by any means. A lot of what I spend my time doing is teaching classes and doing consulting work with clients. I've worked with several different clients in the world of HR that are doing things really similar to this, right? So first of all, if you ever want more info on that, whether it's our classes, whether it's working with us, you can check out this info button up here in the top corner. You can book me for just an hour, just an office hour to solve one of your problems, or we can have a bigger discussion about a bigger project. But yeah, this is not an uncommon use case. Now, if you look at this and you say, I don't work in HR, that's okay too. Like you don't have to be able to utilize this. I think if you get into kind of big enough projects in almost any industry, that some of these general principles will be applicable. Okay, so that's some background and some info on all this. Should we dive into this? Let's do it. So first of all, let me show you the worksheet that is kind of the end state of what we're going to be creating. Now, we're not here to build the most beautiful worksheet. I'm not trying to blow your socks off with that necessarily, but just to speak to some of what you're seeing here. So we have this department data, which comes from the department table. And then we have the data that's coming from the fact tables, right? So you have the hire count, that comes from the hires, active headcount table rather. Termination count comes from the terminations table. Open position counts come from the open positions table. And then you can't see it right now. I'll show you on hover over, but when you hover over one of these open positions, it will tell you how many interviews that there have been for those positions, right? So if I hover over this 14, I'll see there are 14 open positions in clinic support services that have had a grand total of 63 interviews. Oh, and then don't forget the date field, right? So that is from our calendar table. So if I wanted to shift and look at a different year to be able to see what's going on there, I'd have the flexibility to be able to do that, okay? Do we have it? Are we ready? All right, let's do this thing. So I have both a copy of the functional data model, and then I've also got a copy of a data model where nothing is built out yet. So let me just jump in here to show you the active data model first. I'll probably look at this a couple times for the sake of making sure I've got my relationships configured correctly, but let's flip over to that copy that I have here where there's nothing connected yet. Okay, and so let's start by pulling out our 3 base tables. And just quick side note about this data source, there are, I believe, a couple of different tables that we're not using. I originally had built out an even more complex example than this, and I was like, wow, we need to pare this down because this is getting out of hand. So we're not really using like employee details or org hierarchy, although if you want to play around with those and link those into some of your tables, you can. But yeah, let's start with, so active headcount is one of our base tables, right? Next up, at least the way the other one was set up, was open positions. So notice I'm not relating it. I'm not linking it to active headcount. I'm going to drop it here where it says new base table. All right. And then third will be terminations. So I have these 3 tables that are in no way related yet. And Tableau's actually got an alert for us. And it's like, hey, you know, these aren't really going to work right now because they're not connected, which is okay. Chill, Tableau, we're not done yet, right? So let me X out of that and let's start with department, right? So let me take department out here and link it up to active headcount. Okay. And so Tableau made a good suggestion for us. It said, hey, maybe you want to link these on department ID, which is great. And I suppose maybe I should just give you the like 10-second rundown on what's actually in these tables. So like they're pretty basic because I didn't need to, you know, go too wild here, but like here's active headcount, right? So you have like a hire date, an employee ID, job description, department ID, supervisor ID. You get the idea. The terminations table is actually almost the exact same as that with the inclusion of a termination date. All right, you can see that there. Otherwise, I think it's the same structure. And then the open positions actually does follow a fairly similar structure as well, just sans the employee data, right? It just says like, hey, here's the job we're looking for, the department, the supervisor. There's the job rec number. That's like the unique ID for the position that's available, okay? So all 3 of these have a department ID and can link out to that department table. So here's something that caught me off guard when I was first trying to create these multi-fact relationships, which is, I was just thinking, like, I don't know if you've used Tableau Prep, but if you have, I was just thinking like, cool, grab open positions and then hover up in your department and I can link it in like that. And I was just trying to do this and I was like, oh my gosh, what am I doing wrong? Like, what the heck, Tableau? why won't you work, and getting angry. And then I went back and I watched one of Kirk's videos. So shout out again to Kirk. And I saw actually what he did is he grabbed the little plus button there and he dragged from the plus button, and that will allow you to create a secondary connection to a shared dimension table like department, right? So once again, it linked up on department ID. And then third and finally, we'll get determinations in there as well. Now, if you want to go in here and configure these relationships to be even more efficient, you can. So what I mean by that is, like, if I hit the performance options, I could say, yeah, every department ID from terminations, all records from there will match to the department table. Now, I don't know that I can guarantee that every department is represented in the terminations table, so I would probably leave that one as some records match, right? And then in this case, there may be the same department ID listed many times in the left table, but it should only find one match in the right table, right? So if you want to go through and do that to each of these base tables, I think that basic premise, let me zoom in on that for a second. That basic premise should work on all three of them, but to save us a little time, I'm going to skip that for now. Okay, let's do candidates next. So we haven't really spoken about the candidates data to this point, but here it is at a high level, just a candidate name, candidate ID, interview date, job rec number, okay? So the job rec number is found in the open positions table, right? So I would take candidates, and I'm gonna link it out to open positions. Okay, it does its thing. It figured out that the job rec numbers are exist in both tables, so we're good to go there. And then the third piece would be our calendar table. And I feel like maybe at this point we should stop and talk about, like, why is a date or calendar table necessary at all? So here's sort of the basic premise, right? So we have our three fact tables. Get my drawing up here: head count, positions, and terminations, right? And now we have a couple different dimensional tables, department and candidates. Now, if you are going to be using data from multiple fact tables in the same worksheet, you can do that. But here is a best practice to follow, which is you should only use measures from the fact tables, and you should only use dimensions from the shared dimensional tables. Okay, so just say that one more time. Specifically in worksheets where you're leveraging measures from multiple different, or you're leveraging data from multiple fact tables, only measures from the fact tables, only dimensions from the shared dimension tables. Now, the reason for that is because things can start to get really messy and hazy. Like if I grabbed one date field from here, one from here, and one from here, and I'm trying to get them to line up in Tableau, and like, oh, why is Tableau not working? No, what would be better would be to connect them with sort of a unifying table that gets all three dates leveraged against a single date column. And that is what the calendar table is going to do for us, right? So in this case, the calendar table is very basic. It's just one column called date, one row per date. That's it, right? So what we're going to do here is, like, I would grab calendar. And so let me first connect it to active head count, okay? And so in this case, I would say, okay, active head count has a higher date, and I want that to equal the date column coming out of the calendar table. Okay, so in this scenario, if I filter to 2023, it's only going to show me hires from 2023 if I use some hires calculation from active head count. Okay, so next up, so open positions, interestingly, doesn't have a date. I suppose in the real world, you might have like a date posted, but we don't have that. But the candidates table has an interview date. So if I grab candidates and then drop that into the calendar table, I may need to say, okay, interview date equals date. But now that's up and running, okay? And then finally, the terminations table. Now, this one's a little bit of a wild card, right? Because the terminations table actually has two dates. It has a hire date and it has a termination date. So in this example, I'm just going to link it up on termination date. So let's see, I need to edit this relationship. Termination date from the left side will equal date from the right side. So let me just table that conversation for a second. I do want to come back here and propose some other ways that this data model could be set up, or some additions that we could make down the road, but I'm trying to keep things from getting too complex too quickly. So I think this is a good starting point for us, right? And so now let me pop over to sheet 2. This hires, terms, and open positions. Okay, now let me see first of all if some of my calculations carried over when I duplicated the data source. They did. Thank goodness. That's good news for us. So let's do this. First of all, I'm going to get my department name. That's called home department description, coming from the department table, right? So let's go ahead and grab that and then drop that on the row shelf. And then now I want to get hire count, open position count, termination count. Now, all of those are already calculated because I duplicated my original data source, but I'll just show those to you one at a time. So hire count is just a count of the employee ID. And just to show you, that's employee ID specifically from the active headcount table, right? So if I grab employee ID, I'm sorry, not employee ID, we're looking for hire count, aren't we? So if I grab hire count, I guess technically it's employee count. It's not hire count until I filter on a date, but for the sake of what we're doing here, we're just gonna leave it like that. Okay, right, I don't know why that one's so crazy, but we'll see what happens as we filter it down. Okay, so next up would be terminations. Okay, so terminations, same general premise, just count the employee ID from the terminations table. Okay, and then finally, open positions. I think it's, again, the same structure, count the job rec number. Okay, now count versus count distinct, in case anybody needs that breakdown, we've got a video down below in the description, but it's basically just, count is just a row count, whereas count distinct counts the unique values. So I don't think a job rec number is ever going to be repeated with the way this data is structured, so I'm safe doing that. And then let me go to the open positions section of my marks card here, and I will drop the interview count, which is a count of the candidate ID column. I'll drop that on tooltip. And I suppose one other thing that I just want to say at this point, which is like count is a much less memory intensive aggregation than count distinct and Tableau. And that's another thing that relationships afford you the opportunity to use, right? I think with relationships, you can use count versus count distinct much more often because you're not duplicating your data like you do in a join, at least not as much. It also allows you, like if you've built complex enough data models, you know this, like when you start duplicating data, you got to use count distinct. Sometimes you got to use level of detail expressions. It's fine, but all of those things sort of drag Tableau's performance down. So that's another thing that relationships are great for. Not only do they not duplicate data, they can let you simplify your calculations. All right, let me get off my little soapbox here, and let's now get our date field, and let's filter it down to just the year of 2023. See how this is going. So I'll hit 2023, I'll hit OK. Now let me show my filter here. And I don't think my numbers are matching up, which is which is not ideal, but it probably has something to do with my data model. So let me look at what I've done. I don't think anything. Yeah, I don't think anything is up as far as the calculations. So let's go back and study the data model real quick and make sure I didn't just kind of completely biff something. So that's linked up on termination date. This should be linked up on interview date. Okay, good. There it is. It loaded. And that's linked up on hire date. It should be linked on department ID, department ID, department ID. Good. I think my data model is the same, so I may need to do a little bit of digging of my own to study the differences. So interesting. Okay, let me try something just out of curiosity then, which is just, if I did do a count distinct, would everything match up? It does in that case. So I suppose I could do a count distinct there because now my hire count is at 44, which is correct, but I've done something funny here, which is, seemingly causing my data to duplicate, but unfortunately, probably here in real time, it may be a little bit hard for me to totally know what it is that I did. You know what? Actually, one thing I'm going to do real quick, just to make sure that this didn't mess it up, is I do want to look at the way that I set up the performance options within the terminations to department. I didn't do that previously. I don't see why that would cause a problem, but just to make sure I haven't done something silly. that did fix it. Okay, well, I need to go back and do a little studying on my own on the performance options to make sure that the way that I set that up didn't have a negative effect. Apparently it did. I'll just need to, I don't know, honestly, probably chat Kirk because he's the man and ask him about that. But the good news is we're up and running. Our sheets match up now. And we have built a multi-fact relationship table with shared dimensional tables. So I did mention that I would circle all the way back to our data source one more time to talk about this because actually let me even rename a couple of these columns because this is hire count, which that's actually true. So I'm actually okay with that. Termination count, open positions, is interview data working? Yes, it is. Now there is, if anybody there works in HR data and is like thinking about this critically, something that you might be looking at and thinking here is like, well, what if somebody got hired and terminated in the same year? With the way this data is structured, they're going to show up in the terminations table, not in the hire table, right? Or the active headcount table, right? And that is true. So like, for example, instead of just calling this hire count, I may want to say hire count active employees, right? Just to clarify that like, hey, there could have been some people that were hired and terminated within that same calendar year, in which case they would not show up here. So if I need to see those people added to this as well, what I would probably actually do is get a second copy of the terminations table and I would link it up, right? So I'd link it up on department. And then when I linked it up on calendar, instead of linking termination date equals date, I would do hire date equals date, which would allow us to make sure that we're counting those people that were both hired and termed within a single year. So don't need to do that just now. I just wanted to call that out for those that are, every situation is different, right? So you might be sitting there thinking, well, how would it work in this case? Or what if there's two dates that I want to be able to use? Like, how do I do that? So every situation is so unique. If you have questions about it, let me know. So, cool. That takes us pretty close to the end point here. So a couple things I just want to say. First of all, if you thought this was interesting, if you want to dive deeper in relationships, we cover those in some of our classes. We've got 5 classes. We do a couple classes on Tableau Desktop, a couple on calculations, one on Tableau Prep. We love getting to cover this stuff. So check out this info button up here in the corner again. If that's something you're interested in, this Passport program is cool because it gives you half off all of our classes for a 6-month window. And it's like 64 hours of live instruction. So you get to go absolutely bananas for Tableau in doing something like that. And then kind of last thing we'd ask of you, if this worked, hit us up in the comments, let us know. If it didn't work, if something weird came up, let us know in the comments. And if you have other suggestions or ideas, we've got a Google sheet of like 200 video ideas that we're working on, but we just get through as much as we can when we can. So if you have questions or want to help us inspire us for the next idea, just let us know. So thank you for being here, and we will catch you next week here with another Tableau video. Thanks.